Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back to a time when the sky forgot how to be blue and the ground became a giant, muddy sponge. You probably believe that the people of the Middle Ages spent all their time in a constant state of gloom and misery. But before the year 1315, life was actually quite sunny and reliable. For a long time, the weather had been so kind that you could almost set your calendar by the arrival of the first summer breeze. Before you get too comfortable and possibly fall asleep halfway through, tap like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this odd mix of boredom and history. It keeps the channel alive and the stories just sleepy enough to help you drift off again next time. I would love to know where you are listening from tonight. Please post your location and your local time in the comments. It is always wonderful to see how far these sleepy stories travel while the world rests. Now, dim the lights, let the world outside grow quiet, and turn on a fan if you like that soft, steady hum in the background. Let your shoulders loosen and your breathing slow. This is your time to drift. No rush, no deadlines, no noise. Just you, a little warmth in the air, and the faint whisper of history waiting to unfold. So settle in, and let's ease gently into tonight's journey together. The year is 1314, and you are standing on the edge of a wide, golden field in northern Europe. The air is warm, smelling of dry grass and the sweet, heavy scent of blooming clover. You feel the sun on the back of your neck, a steady and familiar heat that has blessed these lands for centuries. This is the tail end of what historians call the medieval warm period. It was a time when the world felt predictable and generous. In fact, the weather was so consistently warm that you might have seen vineyards growing in the north of England, producing grapes that would struggle to ripen in the modern era. People were used to the sun. They trusted the sky. You watch as the wind ripples through the tall stalks of grain, creating waves of gold that stretch toward the horizon. The harvest is coming, and it looks like it will be another good one. There is a sense of deep, quiet security in the air. You know that soon the barns will be full, the cellars will be stocked with all, and the winter will be nothing more than a short, cozy pause before the cycle begins again. You walk slowly back toward your village, your boots clicking softly against the dry, hardened earth of the path. The ground is solid and dependable. You pass by a small stone church where the shadow of the steeple stretches long across the village green. People are working outside, their movements slow and rhythmic in the afternoon heat. You see a neighbor mending a fence, his sleeves rolled up, enjoying the last of the day's light. There is no rush because the weather is an ally. You think about the dinner waiting for you. Perhaps a thick slice of rye bread and some cheese, simple and satisfying. Life in 1314 feels like a long, slow afternoon that will never truly end. You are living in a peak of human comfort, even if that comfort means a thatched roof and a fire on the hearth. If you think your apartment is drafty, try a 14th century cottage. But even then, the summer air makes everything feel easy. As the sun begins to set, the sky turns a deep, bruised purple, then a soft, dusky blue. You sit on a wooden bench outside your home, watching the first stars blink into existence. The air remains mild, the kind of temperature that lets you stay outside long after the lamps have been lit. You hear the distant lowing of cattle and the gentle rustle of leaves in the trees. It is a peaceful time. Historians still argue whether the sudden change that followed was caused by a massive volcanic eruption in the South Pacific or a shift in the North Atlantic Ocean currents. But for you, right now, the world is perfect. You have no way of knowing that this is the final curtain call for the warmth. You are living through the very last days of a golden age, and the transition will be so subtle at first that you won't even notice the danger until the ground beneath your feet begins to turn into a memory. Winter arrives, but it is not a harsh winter. It is strange and damp, but not particularly cold. You spend your days indoors, the fire crackling softly in the center of the room. The smoke rises through a hole in the roof, and the smell of wood smoke clings to your wool tunic. You feel a bit restless, watching the gray clouds hang low over the hills, but you assume it is just a passing phase. Every year has its quirks after all. You spend your evenings carving small wooden toys or mending tools, the steady rhythm of the work helping you feel calm and centered. The dampness is a bit of a nuisance, making the wool feel heavy and smelling slightly, like a very sad sheep, but it is nothing you haven't handled before. You believe that when April comes, the sun will return, the mud will dry, and the world will wake up again. But April 13-15 arrives with a different character. Instead of the gentle spring showers that wake the flowers, the sky opens up with a relentless, heavy gray weight. You stand in your doorway, watching the rain fall. It is not a thunderstorm with dramatic crashes and flashes of light. It is a steady, rhythmic pouring that seems to have no beginning and no end. You watch the water run off the thatch in thick, continuous streams. The dry, dusty paths of the previous year are gone. In their place is a soft, dark sludge that clings to your shoes and pulls at your ankles. You try to go out into the fields to prepare for the spring planting, but the earth has become a thick, heavy dough. Every step is an effort. You lift your foot, and the mud makes a long, slow sucking sound as it reluctantly lets go. You spend hours trying to clear a drainage ditch, but the water just fills it back up as fast as you can dig. You realize that this is not just a rainy week. It becomes a rainy month, then another. The rain is so constant that you begin to forget what the sun looks like. The light is always a flat, pale gray, casting no shadows and offering no warmth. You find yourself checking the sky every morning, hoping for a break in the clouds, only to see the same heavy curtain of mist hanging over the forest. You could call it a staycation, though the lack of indoor plumbing and internet makes the novelty wear off quite quickly. Your world has shrunk to the size of your house and the small, sodden patch of land around it. The constant sound of water, the dripping from the eaves, the splashing in the puddles, the rushing of the swollen stream, becomes the soundtrack to your life. It is a sound that should be relaxing, but there is an underlying tension now. The ground is saturated. It can hold no more. By May, the concern in the village is palpable. You see your neighbors standing in their fields, looking down at the seeds they managed to plant. Instead of green shoots pushing through the soil, there is only a film of stagnant water. The seeds are rotting in the ground, unable to find the oxygen they need to grow. You try to replant a small patch of vegetables near your house, working the mud with your hands, but it feels like trying to farm in a lake. Your fingers are always cold and pruned from the moisture. The dampness has found its way into everything. Your bedstraw feels clammy. Your clothes never quite dry out by the fire, and even the salt in your kitchen has turned into a gray, useless slush. You start to miss the feeling of being truly dry. You dream of the dusty paths of 1314, remembering them as if they belonged to a different life or a different planet. The rain brings a strange, quiet chill to the air. It is not the freezing cold of a deep winter, but a persistent, soaking dampness that gets into your bones. You wear your thickest wool cloak, but the water eventually seeps through the fibers, making the garment heavy and cold against your shoulders. You spend more time by the hearth, but wood is becoming harder to find. You can't just go out and pick up fallen branches anymore. Everything in the forest is soaked through. When you try to burn the wet wood, it hisses and protests, sending out clouds of thick, white smoke that makes your eyes water. You have to spend hours drying the wood near the heat before it will even catch a flame. It is a slow, tedious process that requires constant attention. You find yourself staring into the embers, wondering when the cycle will break. In June, the traditional time for the first hay harvest, the fields are still underwater. You watch the grass grow tall and rank, but it is a sickly, pale green. It is not the sweet, nutritious grass your animals need. It is waterlogged and sour. You see the sheep huddling under the trees, their fleece heavy and matted with mud. They look as miserable as you feel. You try to bring them into the barn, but the floor of the barn has also become a mire. There is no escaping the wet. You find yourself talking to the cows in a low, soothing voice, trying to reassure them, even as you feel your own worry growing. The rhythm of the farm, which has sustained your family for generations, is breaking down. The natural order of the seasons has been replaced by a single, unending season of water. You hear rumors from travelers who pass through the village, their horses splashing through the deep ruts in the road. They tell stories of the same rain falling in the next valley, and the valley after that, and even in the lands across the sea. They say that the great rivers, the Rhine, the Seine, the Thames, have all burst their banks, sweeping away bridges and flooding entire towns. It is a disaster on a scale that no one living has ever seen. Some people in the village start to say that the world is being punished, while others think the stars have moved out of alignment. You don't know who is right, but you do know that the price of grain in the market has started to rise. People are beginning to hold on to what they have, looking at their neighbors with a new, guarded expression. The easy community of the warm years is being replaced by a quiet, desperate caution. Despite the rain, you try to maintain some sense of normalcy. You keep your house as clean as you can, sweeping out the mud that gets tracked in, though it feels like a losing battle. You spend your afternoons reading by the dim light of a tallow candle, if you are lucky enough to have one. The light is small and flickering, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. You find comfort in the simple acts of daily life, grinding a bit of grain, stirring a pot of soup, sharpening a knife. These small movements help to anchor you when the world outside feels like it is dissolving. You remind yourself that the rain must stop eventually. No storm lasts forever. You tell yourself that the sun is still up there, hidden behind the gray, waiting for its moment to return. One afternoon, the rain actually stops for a few hours. You step outside, and the silence is startling. For weeks, You have lived with the constant drumming of water. And now, the world is suddenly quiet. The air is thick and misty, and the clouds are still low, but the falling water has ceased. You walk out toward the fields, your feet sinking deep into the mud with every step. The landscape looks different now. The vibrant greens of spring have been replaced by a dull, muddy brown. The trees are dripping, and the ground is covered in small, stagnant pools that reflect the gray sky. You see a few birds cautiously venturing out, their feathers ruffled and damp. It is a somber, beautiful sight in its own way, like a painting that hasn't quite dried. You find a small patch of ground that is slightly higher than the rest, where the water has drained away a little. You sit down on a damp stone and just breathe. The air is cool and fresh, tasting of wet earth and growing things. For a moment you feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this is the turning point. Maybe the clouds will finally break, and the sun will bake the mud into solid earth again. You imagine the feeling of the warm dust between your toes and the smell of dry hay. You hold onto that image, letting it fill your mind and calm your heart. You stay there until the first cold droplets start to fall again, hitting your face with a soft, persistent touch. You sigh and stand up, the mud pulling at your boots as you turn back toward the village. The rain has returned, and the long, wet year of 1315 is only just beginning. As you walk back, you pass the village well. Usually this is a place of laughter and gossip, but today it is deserted. The water in the well has risen nearly to the top, and it looks murky and brown. You realize that even the water you drink is being affected by the endless rain. You will have to boil it carefully, a task that takes even more of your precious, dry firewood. Every part of life has become more difficult, more demanding. You think about the winter ahead, wondering how you will keep warm and fed if the crops don't grow. But then you stop yourself. There is no use in worrying about the winter yet. You have to focus on today, on keeping the fire going and the roof as dry as possible. You take a deep breath, the damp air filling your lungs, and step back inside your home. The evening is spent in the dim, smoky warmth of the cottage. You listen to the rain on the roof, a sound that has become as familiar as your own heartbeat. You find a bit of comfort in the steady rhythm, letting it lull you into a state of quiet reflection. You think about the resilience of the people around you, how everyone is struggling but still moving forward. You are all in this together, drifting through a sea of mud and mist. You close your eyes, the warmth of the fire slowly seeping into your tired muscles. The world outside may be cold and wet, but here in the small circle of light, you are safe for now. You let your thoughts wander, drifting back to the sun-led fields of 1314, and then forward to a future where the sun returns. You fall into a light, uneasy sleep, the sound of the rain guiding you into your dreams. The next morning, the world is still gray, but you wake with a sense of purpose. You have survived the first few months of this strange new world, and you will survive the rest. You begin your morning routine, moving slowly and deliberately through the damp house. You check the stores of food, noting with a bit of relief that you still have enough for a few weeks. You will have to be careful, stretching the flour and the beans as far as they will go. You think about the mainstream fact that this rain marked the start of the Great Famine, a period that would change Europe forever. But to you, It isn't a historical event. It is just your life. It is the challenge of finding dry wood and the constant effort of keeping your feet warm. You are a part of history now, a silent witness to the changing of an era. You spend the day working on a new project, trying to create a better way to drain the small garden patch near your house. You use stones and branches to create a primitive pipe, hoping it will guide the water away from the struggling plants. It is hard, messy work, and by the time you are finished, you are covered in mud from head to toe. But as you watch the water begin to trickle through your makeshift drain, you feel a small sense of triumph. It is a tiny victory against the endless rain, but it is enough to keep you going. You go back inside, wash your hands as best you can, and sit down by the fire. You are tired, but it is a good kind of tiredness. You have done what you can, and for now, that is enough. The year 1315 continues its slow, wet march across the calendar. Every day is a test of patience and endurance. You learn to appreciate the small things: a moment of quiet, a bowl of warm soup, the sound of a friend's voice. You find that even in the midst of a disaster, there is a kind of beauty in the world. You see it in the way the mist clings to the trees, or the way the raindrops hang like jewels from the eaves of the roof. You realize that you are stronger than you thought, and that you can find peace even when the world feels like it is falling apart. You settle into the rhythm of the rain, letting it become a part of you, a steady, pulsing beat that carries you through the days and into the quiet of the night. The rhythm of the rain has become the rhythm of your life, a steady and relentless tapping that never seems to tire. You stand by your small, glassless window, which is now covered by a piece of translucent, oiled cloth that shivers every time the wind gusts. The light that filters through is a sickly, watery yellow, casting a dim glow over your meager furniture. You watch the water run down the cloth, forming little beads that eventually merge and roll into the wooden sill. The wood is starting to swell, becoming soft and spongy to the touch. It is a small reflection of what is happening to the entire world outside. The earth is no longer a solid foundation. It has become a living, breathing entity of mud and water. You remember a time when the ground was something you didn't even think about, a firm stage for your daily movements. Now every step outside is a calculated risk, a negotiation with a landscape that wants to pull you down and keep you there. You decide to walk out to the main fields to see the state of the winter wheat, though in your heart you already know what you will find. You pull on your heavy wool cloak, which is still slightly damp from yesterday. It feels like wearing a cold, wet hug. You wrap a piece of thick leather around your boots, tying it tight with twine to keep the mud from sucking the shoes right off your feet. As you step out the door, the air hits you, not with a sharp chill, but with a heavy, oppressive moisture that makes it feel like you are breathing through a wet cloth. The world is a study in shades of gray and brown. The vibrant greens of the forest have turned into a dull, olive drab, and the sky is a flat, featureless sheet of lead. You start the walk toward the fields, moving slowly along the edge of the path, where the grass still offers a tiny bit of traction. The mud is truly impressive in its variety. In some places, it is thin and slick, like grease spilled on a kitchen floor. In others, it is thick and heavy, like cold porridge that has been left to sit. You find yourself performing a strange, slow motion dance as you navigate the path, your arms held out for balance. You could call it a very slow, very muddy version of a royal ball, though the guest list is mostly frustrated farmers and the occasional confused duck. You pass by a neighbor's cart, which is buried up to the axle in a particularly deep rut. It looks like it has been there for days, slowly sinking into the earth like a ship in a very slow, moving sea. There is no point in trying to move it until the ground dries, and no one knows when that might be. You keep moving, your breathing becoming heavy as you fight the resistance of the earth. When you reach the fields, you stop and stare. This was supposed to be the source of your life for the coming year. The wheat, which should be standing tall and turning a healthy shade of green, is instead a tangled mess of yellow and brown. The stalks are leaning at odd angles, beaten down by the weight of the water. You walk a few feet into the field, and your boots immediately sink 6 inches into the soil. The land is not just wet, it is saturated. Historians still argue whether the primary cause of the total crop failure was the lack of sunlight or the actual drowning of the root systems. But as you look down, the answer seems to be both. You lean down and pull up a single stalk of wheat. It comes away from the earth with no resistance at all. The roots are black and slimy, smelling of rot and stagnant water. They haven't just stopped growing. They have decomposed in the very soil that was meant to nourish them. This is the reality of the Great Famine beginning to take hold. In a world without modern grocery stores or global supply chains, a failed harvest isn't just a financial loss, it is a direct threat to your existence. You look out over the acres of rotting grain and feel a cold knot of fear in your stomach. You are witnessing a biological disaster on a massive scale. The wheat and rye, the staples of the medieval diet, are simply not built for this much water. They need cycles of rain and sun, of moisture and drying. Without the drying, the fungus takes over. You notice a strange, dark growth on some of the ears of grain, small, hard, purple, black spurs that look like crow's claws. This is ergot, a fungus that thrives in cold, damp conditions. You know enough to stay away from it, as it causes a terrifying sickness that makes people feel like their limbs are on fire. It is just another gift from the endless rain. You spend a long time just standing there, looking at the ruin. The silence of the fields is broken only by the sound of dripping water and the occasional, lonely call of a crow. The birds seem thinner this year, their feathers perpetually ruffled and dull. Even the animals that usually find plenty to eat are struggling. You think about the cows back in the village. They are being fed the last of the dry hay from the previous year, but that supply is dwindling fast. Soon, they will have to be turned out into the sodden pastures, where the grass is watery and lacking in nutrients. You can already see their ribs starting to show through their coats. If you think your diet is getting repetitive, try being a cow in 1315, where the menu is basically water, flavored grass, or grass, flavored water. It is a slow, quiet crisis that is unfolding one day at a time. As you walk back toward the village, you pass the local mill. The great wooden wheel, which usually hums with the sound of grinding grain, is motionless. The stream that powers it has turned into a roaring, brown torrent, the water level rising so high that the wheel is partially submerged, unable to turn against the weight of the flood. The miller is standing in the doorway, his white apron now stained with mud, looking out at the water with a hollow expression. There is no grain to grind, and even if there were, the mill is useless. This is a quirky tidbit of history. During the Great Famine, many mills were destroyed not by fire or war, but by the sheer force of the water they were designed to harness. The very tool that gave the village its bread has been turned into a stationary monument to the weather. The village market is a ghost of its former self. Usually this is a place of noise and color, where people trade wool for wine or vegetables for tools. Today, there are only a few stalls, and they are mostly empty. You see a man trying to sell a few withered leeks and some small, muddy turnips. The prices he is asking are astronomical. You watch a woman trade a silver ring, likely a family heirloom, for a small bag of flour that looks suspiciously damp. The social fabric is starting to fray. People who used to be neighbors are now competitors for the last scraps of food. You see a group of men arguing over the price of a skinny pig, their voices hushed and tense. The laughter that used to define the village square has been replaced by a heavy, watchful silence. Everyone is calculating, measuring their own survival against the needs of others. You head back to your cottage, feeling the weight of the day in your joints. The dampness has a way of making everything feel heavier. Your clothes, your feet, even your thoughts. You go inside and immediately move toward the hearth. The fire is low, just a few glowing embers surrounded by ash. You carefully add a few small sticks that you've been drying on the mantel. They catch slowly, the flame a pale blue at first before turning into a warm, flickering orange. You sit on your stool and hold your hands out toward the heat. Your skin is pale and wrinkled from the moisture, and the warmth feels like a miracle. You close your eyes and try to imagine the smell of baking bread. In the good years, the smell would waft through the village every morning, a scent that promised safety and satisfaction. Now, the air smells only of wet wool and wood smoke. You think about the mainstream fact that the Great Famine caused the death of nearly 10% of the population of Europe. It is a staggering number, but sitting here in your quiet cottage, it feels more personal than that. It is the empty shelf in your larder. It is the way your belt feels a little looser every week. It is the look of worry on the faces of the children you pass in the street. You are living through a transition that will redefine the century. The confidence of the 1200s is being washed away, replaced by a new, grimmer understanding of how fragile life can be. You realize that you are not just a victim of the weather. You are part of a massive, slow-motion shift in the human story. The era of expansion and growth is over, and the era of survival has begun. Despite the gloom, you find small things to do to keep your mind occupied. You spend the evening mending a hole in your tunic, the needle moving rhythmically through the heavy fabric. The repetitive motion is soothing, a way to reclaim a sense of order in a world that feels increasingly chaotic. You find yourself thinking about the stories you heard as a child, stories of lean years and hard winters. You always thought of them as legends, things that happened to other people in other times. Now, you are the one in the story. You wonder what people will say about the year 1315 in 100 years. Will they remember the rain? Will they remember the mud? Or will it just be a date in a dusty book, a cold statistic about grain prices and population loss? The evening deepens, and the rain continues its steady beat. You realize that you have become a master of the indoor life. You know exactly where the roof leaks and have placed small wooden bowls to catch the drips. The sound of the water hitting the wood is a soft, rhythmic percussion, a hollow note from the bowl near the door, a sharper tone from the one by the bed. It is like a very slow, very damp orchestra performing just for you. You find a strange kind of peace in it. You are safe, you are warm, and for tonight, you have a small bowl of thin soup to sustain you. You take a sip of the broth, which is mostly water and a few bits of salted cabbage, and savor the warmth as it spreads through your chest. It isn't much, but it is enough. You think about the ground again, the saturated earth that has caused all this trouble. It is a reminder that everything we build, everything we are, depends on that thin layer of soil beneath our feet. When the soil fails, everything else follows. Historians still argue whether the society of 1315 was overpopulated, and thus more vulnerable to this disaster, a concept often called the Malthusian trap. You don't know anything about population theories, but you do know that there are too many mouths and not enough bread. You see it in the way the children look at the baker's closed door. You see it in the way people guard their small garden patches as if they were gold mines. The earth has taken back its bounty, and you are left to negotiate for the leftovers. You decide to go to bed early, hoping that sleep will make the hunger go away for a while. You bank the fire, covering the embers with ash to keep them alive until morning. You crawl into your bed straw, which feels slightly clammy, but is still the best place to be. You pull your heavy cloak over you as an extra blanket, the familiar scent of the wool acting as a sort of comfort. You listen to the rain, letting your mind drift away from the rotting fields and the empty market. You imagine a world where the sun is so bright you have to squint, where the dust rises in little clouds behind your feet, and where the air is so dry it makes your skin feel tight. It is a beautiful, distant dream. As you drift towards sleep, you think about the resilience of the earth itself. Even now, under all that water, life is waiting. The seeds that didn't rot are dormant, waiting for their moment. The trees are still standing, their roots anchored deep in the mud. The world is not ending, it is just changing. You find a small, quiet strength in that thought. You are part of that resilience. You are still here, still breathing, still finding ways to make it through the day. You let the sound of the rain carry you down into a deep, dreamless sleep, the saturated earth forgotten for a few blessed hours of rest. You are a survivor, and tomorrow is another day to prove it. The next morning, the gray light returns, and with it, the reality of your situation. You wake up and immediately check the bowls. They are nearly full, the water clear and cold. You empty them outside, watching the water join the vast, muddy river that the path has become. You notice that the rain has slowed to a light mist, a fine spray that hangs in the air and coats everything in a shimmering film. It is a small change, but you take it as a sign of progress. You spend the morning cleaning the cottage, moving the furniture to wipe away the dampness that accumulates in the corners. You find a small piece of dried meat that you had forgotten in the back of a cupboard, a tiny treasure that makes you feel wealthy for a moment. You decide to visit the village church, hoping to find some comfort in the community. The church is one of the few stone buildings in the village, and its thick walls offer a sense of permanence and security. Inside, the air is cool and smells of incense and damp stone. A few people are sitting in the pews, their heads bowed. There is no service today, but the space feels sacred nonetheless. You sit in the back, watching the light from a single candle flicker in the draught. It is a small, brave light in a very large, dark world. You feel a sense of connection to the people around you, a shared burden that doesn't need to be spoken. You are all waiting for the same thing, for the sky to clear, for the earth to dry, and for the world to become recognizable again. When you leave the church, you notice a small group of people gathered near the village common. They are looking at a patch of ground where a few hardy weeds have managed to push through the mud. It is a tiny bit of green in a sea of brown. People are pointing at it, their faces softening for a moment. It is a reminder that life is stubborn, that it will find a way even in the most hostile conditions. You feel a sudden surge of affection for those little weeds, those tiny survivors. They are a promise that the earth is not dead, only resting under its heavy blanket of water. You turn back toward your cottage, your steps feeling a little lighter despite the mud. You have a long way to go, and the winter will be hard. But for now, the saturated earth is still holding you up. You are still standing, and that is enough for today. The afternoon passes in a slow, quiet blur. You spend some time sharpening your tools, the rasp of the stone against the metal a steady, comforting sound. You check your small store of firewood, calculating how much you can afford to burn tonight. You decide to be frugal, saving the largest logs for when the real cold arrives. You find yourself becoming an expert in the economy of survival, measuring every resource with a careful eye. It is a hard way to live, but it gives you a sense of control, a feeling that you are managing your own fate, even when the weather is against you. You are learning the true value of things, not in gold or silver, but in warmth, in food, and in the simple, steady rhythm of a day well spent. As the sun sets, or at least as the gray light fades into a deeper gray, you return to your fire. You watch the flames dance, their movement a constant source of fascination. You think about the generations of people who have sat by fires like this, facing their own challenges and finding their own ways to survive. You are part of a long, unbroken chain of human endurance. The year 1315 is just one chapter in that story, a particularly wet and muddy chapter, but a chapter nonetheless. You take a deep breath, the damp air no longer feeling so oppressive. You have found a way to live with the rain, to accept it as a part of your world. You are at peace with the saturated earth, knowing that beneath the mud, the promise of the future is still alive and well. The morning light is a pale, translucent gray, filtering through the damp mist that has settled over your home like a heavy, cold blanket. You wake to the familiar sound of water, but today it is not the aggressive drumming of a storm. It is a soft, persistent drizzle that seems to hang in the air rather than fall. You sit up in your bedstraw, feeling the slight stiffness in your joints that comes from sleeping in a room that never quite dries out. You stretch your arms, your muscles protesting the chill, and your mind turns immediately to the most basic of needs, the preservation of your food. In the year 1315, survival is not just about what you can find today, but what you can save for tomorrow. You walk over to the small, shadowed corner of your kitchen, where you keep your most precious resource, reaching for the heavy ceramic crock that sits on a high shelf to stay away from the creeping damp of the floor. You lift the lid, and instead of the dry white crystals you expect to see, you find a gray, clumpy slush. The salt, the legendary white gold of your world, has succumbed to the humidity. It is no longer a fine powder, but a sticky, weeping mass that seems to be absorbing the very atmosphere. This is more than just a culinary annoyance. It is a direct threat to your winter survival. You need salt to cure the meat from the livestock you might have to slaughter, and you need it to preserve the fish that occasionally makes its way inland. Without dry salt, the food you have will simply rot, turning into a wasted resource in a time when every calorie is a treasure. You dip your finger into the crock and taste the salt, which is sharp and bitter, a stark contrast to the blandness of the boiled grains you have been eating. You realize that you are running low, and the prospect of getting more is becoming a distant, expensive dream. You think about how salt is made, a process that usually feels like a natural miracle, but has now become a logistical nightmare. In the coastal regions of France and the Low Countries, people rely on the sun to evaporate seawater in large, shallow ponds called salt pans. During the good years, the sun would beat down on these pools, leaving behind thick crusts of pure, white salt. But this year, there has been no sun. The salt pans are nothing more than cold, diluted puddles of gray water, constantly refreshed by the relentless rain. This is a mainstream historical fact that many people forget. The Great Famine was not just a failure of grain, but a total collapse of the salt industry. Without the heat of the sun, the primary method of salt production simply stopped. If you think your groceries are expensive now, imagine a world where the price of a basic seasoning increases by 400% in a single season, because the weather decided to stop cooperating. You decide to head down to the village market, hoping that perhaps a merchant has arrived with a fresh supply from the inland salt mines. You pull on your cloak, which feels heavier every day, and step out into the mist. The village is quiet, the usual bustle replaced by a cautious, slow-moving energy. You pass the communal bakehouse, but there is no scent of bread today. Instead, there is only the smell of wet wood and the faint, sour tang of the nearby marshes. You walk toward the market square, your boots finding the few remaining solid stones in a sea of dark mud. You see a small crowd gathered around a merchant's cart, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and desperation. You squeeze through the group, your eyes searching for the familiar sight of the sturdy wooden barrels used to transport salt. The merchant is a weary-looking man with a mud-splattered coat and eyes that seem to have seen too much. He is not selling barrels, he is selling small, hand-measured pouches of salt, and the cost is staggering. He is asking for silver coins, or better yet, high-quality wool or leather. You realize that a single pouch, barely enough to preserve a few sides of bacon, would cost you a week's worth of labor. You could call it a premium luxury experience, though the luxury in question is simply the ability to keep your dinner from turning into a science project. You watch as a wealthy farmer from the edge of the village trades a beautiful, polished brass bowl for a small quantity of the gray crystals. The exchange is silent and grim. There is no haggling, no light-hearted banter. Salt has become a currency of survival, and the exchange rates are brutal. As you stand there, you remember a quirky tidbit you once heard from a traveling friar. In some parts of the world, salt was once used to pay the wages of soldiers, which is where the word salary comes from, in 1315. That ancient history feels very modern. You look at your own hands, calloused and stained with the work of the farm, and wonder what your labor is worth in a world where the basic elements of life are disappearing. Historians still argue whether the salt crisis was worsened by the heavy taxes imposed by local lords, a burden known in some regions as the gabelle, or if the environmental collapse was so absolute that no amount of economic management could have saved the supply. You don't care much for the politics of it. You just know that your meat will spoil and your soup will be flat and tasteless. You turn away from the market, empty-handed and heavy-hearted. You walk back toward your cottage, passing the local stream which has now become a wide, rushing river of silt and debris. You see a few people standing on the bank, trying to catch fish with simple nets, but the water is too murky and the current too strong. Even the fish are hiding from the chaos. You realize that you will have to find other ways to preserve whatever food you can find. You think about smoking the meat, but that requires a constant, steady fire and a supply of dry wood, both of which are in short supply. Everything in your world is interconnected. The failure of the sun leads to the failure of the salt, which leads to the loss of the meat, which leads to a winter of empty bellies. Back in your kitchen, you look at the small piece of salt pork you have left hanging from a hook. It is your last bit of protein, and you have been saving it for a special occasion that never seems to come. You decide to use a tiny bit of your remaining salt slush to rub into the surface, hoping to draw out some of the moisture and keep the bacteria at bay. The process is slow and meticulous. You use a clean cloth to pat the meat dry, then carefully massage the salt into every crevice. You find a strange, meditative peace in the task. It is a way of fighting back, a small act of defiance against the rot that is trying to consume your world. You hang the meat back up, high above the hearth, where the rising heat might offer a bit of extra protection. The afternoon passes in a slow, quiet rhythm. You spend some time cleaning your storage jars, scrubbing them with hot water and a bit of sand to ensure they are perfectly clean. If you can't have salt, you must have cleanliness. You move with a deliberate, sleepy grace, your movements slowed by the lack of a hearty meal. You find that your senses are becoming more acute. The smell of the damp earth is more intense, and the sound of the rain is a constant, shifting melody. You find yourself listening to the different tones of the drops hitting the various surfaces around your home. The soft thud on the thatch, the sharp click on the stone doorstep, the muffled splash in the puddles outside. It is a complex, natural symphony that speaks of a world in transition. You decide to try a historical comparison to keep your spirits up. You think about the great feasts you've heard of in the king's court, where spices from the east like pepper and cinnamon are used by the handful. In your world, even those noblemen are likely struggling now. The trade routes are flooded, the pack animals are dying, and even the wealthiest lords can't buy a sunny day. It's a bit of a grim comfort, but knowing that the entire social hierarchy is being shaken by the same rain makes you feel a little less alone. You imagine a duke sitting in his drafty stone castle, staring at a plate of unseasoned venison, feeling the same longing for a bit of salt that you do. It's the great equalizer, a reminder that nature doesn't care about titles or gold. As the evening settles in, you make a small fire using the last of your dry kindling. You watch the flames, their bright orange and yellow hues providing the only color in your gray world. You decide to cook a simple meal of boiled beans, adding a tiny pinch of your precious salt slush at the very last moment. The steam rises from the pot, carrying the earthy scent of the beans and a hint of the salt's sharp tang. You eat slowly, savoring every bite. The warmth of the food spreads through your body, relaxing your muscles and clearing your mind. You realize that while life has become incredibly difficult, there is still a quiet beauty in the simplicity of survival. Each meal is a victory, each warm moment a gift. You think about the scholarly debate surrounding the Great Famine once more. Some experts believe that the population of Europe had reached a saturation point, where there were simply too many people for the land to support even in good years. When the weather turned, the system collapsed like a house of cards. You look around your small, humble home and feel the truth of that idea. You have always lived close to the edge, but the edge has now moved closer to you. The margin for error has disappeared. You are living in a time where a few weeks of rain can change the course of history, and where a jar of wet salt is more valuable than a pile of coins. You spend the last hours of the day mending a small tear in one of your grain sacks. You work by the light of the fire, the needle moving rhythmically through the heavy linen. Your thoughts drift back to the sun-drenched days of 1314. When salt was something you took for granted. You remember the taste of a perfectly seasoned roast, the skin crisp and salty, the meat tender and juicy. It feels like a memory from a different life, a dream of a world that no longer exists. But you don't let yourself sink into sadness. Instead, you use the memory as a fuel, a reminder of what the world can be and what you are working toward. The sun will return, the salt pans will dry, and the feasts will happen again. You just have to make it through the damp, quiet present. The fire begins to die down, the glowing embers casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. You stand up and stretch, your body feeling heavy and ready for sleep. You check your meat one last time, satisfied that it is as protected as it can be. You cover the salt crock tightly, whispering a small hope that the contents will remain stable through the night. You move toward your bed, the cool air of the room feeling refreshing after the heat of the fire. You lie down, pulling your cloak up to your chin, and listen to the rain. It is a soothing sound now, a white noise that masks the silence of the village. You feel yourself drifting, your mind becoming a blank slate where only the rhythm of the water remains. You dream of the coast, though you have never seen the sea. In your dream, the water is a brilliant, sparkling blue, and the sun is a giant, golden coin in the sky. You see the salt pans, stretching out like a grid of mirrors, each one filled with a shimmering layer of white crystals. You walk among them, the salt crunching under your feet like fresh snow. You pick up a handful and let it slip through your fingers. The grains dry and warm against your skin. It is a dream of abundance, of a world where nothing is wasted and everything is in its place. You feel a sense of profound peace, a deep knowing that the balance will eventually be restored. The saturated earth will dry, and the white gold will return. When you wake briefly in the middle of the night, the room is pitch black, and the rain has finally stopped. The silence is profound, a heavy, expectant stillness that makes you hold your breath. You listen for any sound, the rustle of a mouse, the creak of the roof, the distant bark of a dog, but there is nothing. It is as if the world has taken a deep breath and is holding it, waiting for the next move of the heavens. You feel a strange sense of connection to the earth in this moment, a realization that you are a part of this great, slow-moving cycle. You are not just a person living through a bad year. You are a witness to the power of the natural world. You settle back into your bed straw, the quiet acting as a soft, comforting pillow. The salt crisis is just one part of the story of 1315, but for you it is a central one. It represents the loss of control, the way the most basic tools of human civilization can be rendered useless by a shift in the climate. But it also represents the ingenuity and resilience of the human spirit. You are finding ways to adapt, ways to preserve, and ways to find meaning in the struggle. You are learning that flavor is a luxury, but nutrition is a necessity. You are discovering that you can live without the things you once thought were essential, and that the simplest things, a warm fire, a dry bed, a quiet moment, are the most important of all. You let your breathing slow, matching the rhythm of the quiet night, and fall back into a deep, restful sleep. Tomorrow you will check your meat again. Tomorrow you will see if the merchant has lowered his prices or if another has arrived with more affordable stores. Tomorrow you will look for ways to dry your wood and clear your garden. But for now, you are at rest. The salt crisis is a problem for the daylight, and in the dark, you are safe. You are a survivor in the coldest, wettest year of the century, and you are doing just fine. You drift off, the image of the golden sun and the white salt pans lingering in your mind like a promise. The world is changing, and you are changing with it, moving forward one quiet, steady step at a time. The saturated earth is still there, but you have found a way to stand on it. As the first hint of dawn begins to touch the edges of the sky, you are still deep in sleep, your body gathering the strength it needs for the day ahead. The salt in your crock is still damp, the meat on the hook is still curing, and the rain is still a possibility. But you are ready. You have the resilience of the earth and the patience of the seasons. You are a part of history, a quiet, steady presence in a world of chaos. And as the world wakes up to another day of gray light and misty air, you will wake up too, ready to face whatever the year 1315 has in store for you. You are a master of the damp, a curator of the salt, and a survivor of the great rain. The horizon is no longer a crisp line where the earth meets the sky. It has become a blurred, smudged boundary of charcoal and slate. As you stand on the high ridge overlooking the valley, you can see the great stone castle in the distance, its towers rising like jagged teeth against the weeping clouds. In the sunnier years, that castle was a symbol of absolute power, a gleaming white sentinel that promised protection and order. Now, it looks like a lonely island in a sea of dark, churning liquid. You watch as the gray mist curls around the battlements, making the massive structure look ghostly and fragile. Even the high lords, with their thick walls and their iron-fisted laws, are finding that the weather does not care about their titles or their bloodlines. The kingdom is melting, and the authority of the crown is being washed away just as surely as the topsoil in your small garden. You pull your hood lower over your eyes, feeling the cold droplets run down the bridge of your nose, and begin the long, slippery descent toward the valley floor. You find yourself thinking about the messengers who must travel between these great estates. If you think your morning commute is a hassle, imagine being a royal herald in 1315, trying to deliver an urgent scroll across a landscape that has been turned into a giant bowl of chocolate pudding. There are no paved roads, only tracks that have been churned into deep, treacherous canyons of muck by the wheels of carts and the hooves of desperate horses. You see a rider in the distance, his horse heaving and splattering through the sludge. The man is covered in so much dark earth that he looks more like a statue made of clay than a human being. He is carrying news of royal edicts and new taxes, but those papers are likely as damp and illegible as the hopes of the people they are meant for. The infrastructure of the kingdom, the very thing that keeps a society connected, is physically dissolving. The speed of information has slowed to a crawl, and the king's voice is muffled by the sound of the rain. You walk past the outer gates of a local manor house, where the Lord's guards are huddled under a wooden lean-to. They look bored and miserable, their polished armor now dulled by rust and water spots. Usually, these men would be out hunting in the woods or practicing their drills, but today they are just trying to stay dry. The Lord himself is likely inside, staring at a fireplace that is struggling to stay lit with damp logs. This is the mainstream historical fact that defines this year. King Edward IX of England, facing the soaring costs of food, issued the Price Ordinance of 1315. It was an official decree that set a maximum price for beef, mutton, pork, poultry, and eggs. It was a noble attempt to stop the soaring inflation. But like most attempts to legislate the laws of nature, it failed spectacularly. The merchants simply stopped selling their goods at the market, preferring to keep them or trade them in secret for much higher values. You can't command the price of a loaf of bread when the wheat to make it has vanished into the mud. You continue your walk, passing a small group of peasants who are trying to pull a dead cow out of a drainage ditch. The animal looks thin, its ribs casting long shadows against its hide, even in the dim light. The lords are losing their livestock, just as the peasants are. But for the lords, it is a loss of prestige and wealth. For the peasants, it is the loss of everything. Historians still argue whether the political instability of the time, specifically the ongoing wars with Scotland and the internal bickering among the powerful barons, made the famine significantly worse by diverting resources away from relief efforts. You see the evidence of this conflict in the way the local lord has fortified his granary, not against a foreign invader, but against his own hungry subjects. The social contract is being stretched to the breaking point. The lords are expected to provide protection and food in exchange for labor, but when there is no food, the labor becomes a heavy, resentful burden. The atmosphere in the manor's great hall is thick with the scent of wet wool and the sharp, acidic smell of stale awl. You imagine the scene inside the tapestries, which once depicted vibrant hunting scenes and glorious battles, are now heavy and damp, smelling faintly of mildew. The stone floors are cold and sweating, and the laughter that used to echo off the high ceilings has been replaced by the quiet murmuring of worried advisors. The nobility are finding that their gold is increasingly useless. You can have a chest full of silver coins, but if the local baker has no flour, those coins are just cold, hard circles of metal. You could call it a very early and very literal version of a liquidity crisis, where the only thing liquid is the world outside. The high life has become a struggle for basic comfort, a realization that even a crown can't keep your toes warm when the firewood is soaked through. There is a quirky tidbit from the records of this time that illustrates just how dire things became for the elite. In August of 1315, King Edward II and his massive royal entourage traveled to the town of St. Albans. Normally, the arrival of the king would be a cause for celebration and massive feasts. However, the town and the local abbey were so desperately short of food that they actually had to turn the king away. There was no bread to be found, not even for the monarch of the land. Imagine being the king, the chosen representative of God on earth, and being told that there isn't so much as a crust of rye for your dinner. It was a moment of profound humiliation, a clear sign that the traditional order of the world had been completely overturned by the weather. The kingdom was no longer a structured hierarchy. It was just a collection of hungry people wandering through the rain. You move through the village that clusters around the manor walls, noticing how the houses seem to be huddling together for warmth. The thatch on the roofs is turning a dark, sickly black as it rots under the constant moisture. You see a woman sitting in a doorway, her hands moving mechanically as she tries to spin wool that is too damp to hold a thread. The humidity has ruined everything, even the simple crafts that keep a household running. You find yourself feeling a strange sort of pity for the lords. They were raised to believe they were different from the rest of us, that they were immune to the common struggles of life. Now, they are finding out that they are made of the same flesh and bone, susceptible to the same hunger and the same cold. The mud is the great leveler, coating the peasant's rags, and the knight's surcoat with the same indifferent, brown stain. You spend some time watching a group of workers who are trying to reinforce the manor's walls. The constant rain has softened the ground so much that the heavy stones are starting to shift and settle at odd angles. They are using wooden beams to prop up a sagging corner, but the wood is slick and the ground keeps giving way. It is a metaphor for the entire kingdom's, a massive, ancient structure that is slowly sinking into the muck because its foundations have been compromised. The lords are trying to hold it all together with edicts and threats, but you can't threaten the earth into staying firm. You find a bit of humor in the situation. Watching a high-ranking steward trying to maintain his dignity while his expensive leather boots are slowly swallowed by a puddle is a sight that makes you smile, despite your own misery. It is the small, petty satisfactions that keep you going in a year like this. As the day begins to fade into a deeper shade of gray, you find a spot under a large, ancient oak tree that offers a tiny bit of shelter. You sit on a damp root and watch the manor house, thinking about the complexity of the world you live in. In the warm years, everything felt so simple. The lords ruled, the peasants worked, and the sun shone. Now, Every relationship is being re-evaluated. The peasants are looking at the lords and wondering why. They should give up their last bit of grain as a tax. The lords are looking at the peasants and wondering how to keep them from revolting. It is a time of deep, quiet tension, a pause in the heartbeat of the kingdom. You realize that you are witnessing the birth of a new era, one where the old certainties are no longer enough to sustain the people. You think about the scholarly debate concerning the Great Slump. Some historians argue that the famine of 1315 triggered a long-term economic decline that lasted for decades, while others believe it was just a temporary shock to a system that was already failing. From where you are sitting, the distinction doesn't matter much. Whether it's a slump or a shock, it feels like the end of the world. You see the way the children look at the manor house, not with awe, but with a guarded, hungry curiosity. They aren't looking for a leader. They are looking for a meal. The aura of the nobility is fading, replaced by the stark reality of survival. If you can't feed your people, you can't lead them. And the lords are finding that their storehouses are not as bottomless as they once thought. The rain starts to pick up again, the soft drizzle turning into a steady, rhythmic pouring. You watch the water run off the manor's roof in thick, continuous sheets, echoing the sound of the stream in the distance. The world is a place of constant motion and noise, but it is a noise that offers no comfort. You stand up, your joints clicking in the damp air, and begin the walk back to your own small home. You pass a field where the Lord's prize horses are standing, their heads low and their coats matted with mud. They look like statues of sorrow, forgotten in the rain. You feel a sudden sense of gratitude for your own small cottage. It might be drafty, and the roof might leak, but it is yours, and you don't have the burden of trying to rule a kingdom that is melting away beneath your feet. You think about the fashion of the nobility, which has always been about excess and display. In 1315, the long flowing robes and the pointed shoes are a disaster. You imagine a countess trying to navigate a muddy courtyard in silk slippers, her hem trailing in the filth. It is a ridiculous image, a reminder of how out of touch the wealthy can be with the reality of the earth. In your world, a good pair of thick wool socks and a sturdy pair of boots are worth more than a dozen silk dresses. The luxury of the warm years has been replaced by the utility of the wet years. You could call it a very early shift toward minimalism, though no one at the time would have used such a fancy word. They just called it trying not to freeze to death. When you finally reach your door, you take one last look back at the castle on the hill. The lights are starting to appear in the windows, small, flickering yellow dots in the vast, dark landscape. It looks beautiful from a distance, a spark of human civilization in the middle of a wild, watery world. But you know the truth behind those lights. Inside there is worry and hunger, and a desperate struggle to maintain an image of power. You step inside your own home, and are greeted by the familiar smell of wood smoke and dampness. You move toward the hearth and start to build up the fire, the small flames providing a much-needed sense of warmth and security. You are just a small part of the kingdom, a single thread in the fabric of history, but tonight you are the king of your own small, dry corner. The evening passes in a quiet, contemplative mood. You spend some time mending a wooden bowl that has cracked in the humidity, the glue sticky and slow to dry. You find comfort in the physical work, the way it grounds you in the present moment. You think about the stories the traveling minstrels used to tell. Stories of chivalry and romance, of knights in shining armor and ladies in distress. Those stories seem so far away now, like they belong to a different world. The real story of 1315 is about the mud, the rain, and the quiet resilience of the people who are trying to make it through. It is a story of a kingdom that is learning to be humble, a story of lords who are learning that they are not gods. As you lie down in your bedstraw, you listen to the wind howling around the eaves of the house. It is a lonely sound, the sound of a world that is in pain. But you also hear the steady, rhythmic dripping of the water into the bowls you've placed around the room. It is a sound of order, a sound of management. You have done what you can to protect your home and your life. You are a survivor, and you are finding ways to thrive even in the middle of a disaster. You let your mind drift back to the image of the king being turned away from the abbey, a reminder that no one is truly in control of this world. We are all just guests of the weather, and right now, the weather is a very demanding host. You think about the future, wondering what the kingdom will look like when the rain finally stops. Will the Lord still be in power? Will the social order return to the way it was? Or will the memory of the mud change everything? Historians still argue whether the Great Famine was a catalyst for the peasant revolts that would happen later in the century, a slow burning fuse that was lit by the hunger of 1315. You don't know the answer, but you can feel the change in the air. The world is not the same as it was, and it never will be again. You find a strange sense of peace in that realization, a feeling of being part of something larger than yourself. You are a witness to the turning of the wheel, a quiet observer of the kingdom in mud. You fall into a deep, restful sleep, the sound of the rain lulling you into a state of quiet reflection. You dream of a world where the paths are dry and the grain is tall, but in your dream, the people are different. They are stronger, more resilient, and more connected to each other. They have learned the lessons of the rain, and they are ready for whatever the future holds. You wake for a moment in the middle of the night, feeling the warmth of the fire on your face, and then drift back into the shadows. You are safe, you are warm, and for now, that is all that matters. The kingdom may be in mud, but your spirit is still standing tall. As the first light of dawn begins to touch the gray sky, you are ready for another day. You will face the mud, you will face the rain, and you will find ways to keep moving forward. You are a survivor of the year 1315, a witness to the Great Famine, and a part of the long, unbroken story of human endurance. The lords may have their castles and their crowns, but you have the resilience of the earth and the patience of the seasons. You are ready for whatever comes next, one quiet, steady step at a time. The kingdom in mud is your home, and you will find a way to make it through, one rainy day at a time. The morning reveals a world that is still soaking wet, but there is a new sense of purpose in your movements. You check your small garden, you mend your tools, and you prepare for the challenges of the day. You are part of a community that is struggling, but still standing, a village that is learning to survive together. You find strength in the shared burden, in the quiet nods of your neighbors, and the shared laughter that occasionally breaks through the gloom. You are not alone in the mud. You are part of a kingdom that is learning to be resilient. And as the rain continues its steady, rhythmic beat, you move forward, a quiet, steady presence in a world of change. The edge of the village fades behind you as the first great oaks of the ancient forest loom out of the mist. You step off the remains of the muddy track and onto a carpet of sodden leaves, feeling the ground beneath you change from the thick, sucking sludge of the fields to something slightly more resilient, though no less damp. The forest in 1315 is a different world, a cathedral of grey bark and dripping moss that seems to hold its breath as you enter. The air here is cooler, smelling of old wood and the sharp, clean scent of crushed pine needles. You pull your cloak tighter around your chest, the wool heavy with the moisture of 1,000 raindrops. You are here because the granaries are empty, the markets are bare, and the earth has refused to give up its grain. The forest is your last hope, a wild and unpredictable grocery store that doesn't accept coins, only patience and a very keen eye. You move slowly, your boots making a soft, muffled sound against the wet earth, as you begin the long search for anything that might fill the hollow ache in your stomach. The canopy above you is a tangled ceiling of branches, blocking out whatever pale light might have escaped the clouds. It feels as though you are walking through a dream, or perhaps a memory of a time when the woods were a place of play rather than a place of desperate survival. You look up and see the heavy droplets hanging from the tips of the leaves, shimmering like tiny, cold jewels before they inevitably fall and join the dampness below. You could call it a very intense, very wet, multi-month camping trip without any of the cool gadgets or waterproof jackets from a modern outdoor store. Your gear consists of a sharpened knife, a woven basket, and a sense of growing urgency. You find yourself looking at the trees not as majestic giants, but as potential sources of calories. Every bit of green and every protrusion of bark is scrutinized with the intensity of a scholar reading a rare manuscript. You reach a patch of ground where the light is a bit stronger, and you drop to your knees to inspect a cluster of wild garlic. The leaves are small and a bit limp, but the scent is unmistakable, sharp, pungent, and full of the promise of flavor. You dig into the soft earth with your fingers, pulling up the small, white bulbs. They are tiny compared to what you would find in a good year, but today they are treasures. You wipe the dirt onto your tunic and place them carefully in your basket. This is the reality of the forager's path, a constant, rhythmic movement of bending, searching, and gathering. You find a few late, season berries that have somehow survived the rain, though they are watery and lack the sweetness of summer. You eat one, and the juice is thin and tart, but it provides a tiny spark of energy that carries you further into the woods. As you walk deeper into the trees, you find yourself thinking about the mainstream historical fact that during the Great Famine, people were forced to eat famine foods that were usually reserved for livestock or seen as a last resort. Acorns, which are usually left for the pigs to fatten up on, became a staple for many families. You see a scattered layer of them beneath a large oak, their caps discarded like tiny helmets. You know that you can't just eat them raw. They are bitter and full of tannins that would make you sick. You will have to take them home, shell them, and soak them in water for days to leach out the bitterness before grinding them into a coarse, heavy flour. It is a lot of work for a very small return, but when the alternative is nothing, the acorn becomes a king's feast. You spend an hour filling a corner of your basket, the steady movement of your hands providing a meditative rhythm that calms your mind. The forest is quiet, but it is not silent. You hear the constant, soft dripping of water, the occasional rustle of a small animal in the undergrowth, and the distant, lonely call of a wood pigeon. You find yourself listening for the sound of larger game, but the woods feel strangely empty. Historians still argue whether the decline in wild game during this period was a result of massive hunting by a starving population, or if the climate shift itself disrupted the breeding cycles of the deer and boar. From your perspective, the cause doesn't matter as much as the result. The forest, which used to be teeming with life, feels haunted. You see a few tracks in the mud, but they are old and filled with water. You think about the forest laws of the kingdom, which strictly forbid anyone but the nobility from hunting the king's deer. In the good years, getting caught poaching could cost you a hand or even your life. Now, the guards are either too hungry to care or have retreated to the warmth of the castle. The law of the belly has replaced the law of the land. You find a fallen log that is covered in a thick layer of bright green moss. You run your hand over it, the texture soft and cool against your skin. This is where you might find mushrooms, those strange, fleeting gifts of the damp. You move carefully, looking for the tail bumps in the moss. You find a small cluster of chanterelles, their golden, yellow caps standing out against the dark wood like coins dropped in the mud. You feel a surge of genuine joy, a rare emotion in 1315. These are a delicacy even in the best of times. You harvest them with a steady hand, being careful not to bruise the delicate flesh. You also find some darker, more mysterious fungi, but you leave those alone. You know that in a world without hospitals, a mistake in mushroom identification is a final one. If you enjoy foraging for expensive mushrooms in a modern park, you'd probably find the stakes of 1315 a bit too authentic for your tastes. There is a quirky tidbit about the trees themselves that you remember from an old woodsman. The inner bark of certain trees, like the pine or the birch, can be eaten if you prepare it correctly. This layer, known as the cambium, is surprisingly nutritious, though it tastes like a mix of sawdust and desperation. You find a young birch tree that has been blown over by a recent wind, and use your knife to peel away the outer, papery bark. Beneath it lies the pale, flexible inner layer. You shave off a few strips and tuck them away. It isn't exactly a gourmet meal, but it can be boiled into a kind of chewy pasta or dried and ground into a filler for your acorn bread. You've heard of farm to table, but this is more like mud to mouth, which has a significantly less trendy ring to it. You are learning to see the world as a collection of parts, some of which can keep you alive, and some of which cannot. The afternoon begins to lean toward evening, the shadows under the trees growing long and distorted. You find a small stream that is running clear, its voice a cheerful babble compared to the somber silence of the forest. You kneel down and cup the water in your hands, the coldness making your skin tingle. You take a long drink, the water tasting of stone and earth. As you sit by the stream, You notice a patch of stinging nettles growing near the bank. In the spring, these are a common vegetable, but even now, the younger leaves can be harvested. You use your thick wool mittens to protect your hands as you pluck the tops. When boiled, the sting disappears, leaving behind a dark green soup that is full of iron and vitamins. You feel a sense of pride in your growing collection of forest treasures. You are not just a victim of the weather. You are an active participant in your own survival. You decide to push a little further into a part of the woods you've never visited before. The trees are older here, their trunks thick and gnarled, covered in layers of lichen that look like frozen sea foam. You find a small clearing where a group of wild apple trees are growing. The fruit is small, hard, and incredibly sour. The kind of apples that would usually be left for the birds. But you gather them anyway, thinking of how they can be sliced and dried near the fire. The tartness will be a welcome change from the blandness of your other foods. You find yourself thinking about the resilience of these trees. They don't have the luxury of moving to a warmer climate or complaining about the rain. They just stand there, year after year, taking whatever the sky throws at them and continuing to grow. You feel a strange sense of kinship with them. You are both rooted in this damp, difficult earth. As you head back toward the village, the weight of the basket on your arm is a comforting presence. It isn't enough to feed a family for a month, or even a week, but it is enough for today. You move with a slow, rhythmic pace, your mind drifting through a series of sleepy, half-formed thoughts. You think about the warmth of your hearth and the way the mushrooms will smell when they hit the pan. You think about the quiet dignity of the forager's life, a life that requires you to be fully present in every moment. In the fields, you are constantly looking toward the future, worrying about the harvest. In the woods, you are only looking at what is right in front of you. It is a simpler, more direct way of living, even if it is born out of necessity. The light is fading fast now, the gray mist turning into a deep, velvety blue. You see the first lights of the village through the trees, small and flickering like distant stars. You feel a sense of relief, but also a slight reluctance to leave the quiet sanctuary of the woods. Out here, the problems of the kingdom and the failures of the lords seem far away. The forest doesn't care about price ordinances or royal edicts. It only cares about the rain, the sun, and the slow, steady cycle of life and death. You take one last deep breath of the forest air, feeling the dampness settle in your lungs. You are tired, your muscles are aching, and your clothes are soaked through. But you have found what you came for. You have walked the forager's path and returned with the bounty of the wild. You pass by a large, hollow tree that looks like it could have been a home for someone in an old folk tale. You imagine curled up inside, safe from the rain and the wind, living on a diet of nuts and berries. It is a pleasant, sleepy thought, a dream of a simpler life without the burdens of taxes or the complexities of the village. But you know that the reality is much harder. The forest is a generous host, but it is also a harsh one. It requires strength, knowledge, and a willingness to accept whatever is offered. You move past the tree and back onto the muddy track. The transition from the woods to the village, feeling like a return to a more complicated reality. When you finally reach your cottage, the fire is a low glow in the center of the room. You set your basket down on the table and begin to sort through your findings. The garlic, the acorns, the mushrooms, the birch bark, and the sour apples. It is a modest collection, but it represents hours of effort and a deep connection to the land. You feel a sense of accomplishment as you organize your treasures. You are a survivor, a forager, a master of the damp woods. You spend the next hour cleaning the mushrooms and preparing the nettles, the movements of your hands slow and deliberate. The smell of the cooking food begins to fill the small room, a warm and earthy scent that pushes back the chill of the evening. You eat your meal of mushroom and nettle soup, the flavors rich and complex. It is the best thing you have tasted in weeks. You savor every spoonful, letting the warmth spread through your body and relax your tired limbs. You find yourself thinking about the scholarly debate once more, whether the safety valve of the forest was actually enough to save lives, or if it was just a psychological comfort. For you, the answer is clear. The forest provided more than just food. It provided a sense of agency, a way to fight back against the despair of the famine. It reminded you that even when the systems of men fail, the systems of nature continue to function, however poorly. As you finish your soup, you look at the acorns soaking in the bowl of water. They are a promise of tomorrow's bread, a reminder that survival is a continuous process. You feel a deep, heavy tiredness settling over you, the kind of tiredness that comes from a day of physical labor and mental focus. You move toward your bed, the sound of the rain starting up again outside. It is a familiar sound now, a lullaby that no longer feels threatening. You have survived another day, and you have the forest to thank for it. You let your mind drift back to the image of the golden chanterelles in the green moss, a bright spot of color in a gray world. You fall into a deep, dreamless sleep, your breathing matching the steady rhythm of the rain on the thatch. You are a part of the forest now, a small, resilient creature that has found its place in the cycle of the seasons. The forager's path is not an easy one, but it is a path that leads to survival. You are ready for tomorrow, ready to head back into the trees and see what else the wild has to offer. You are a witness to the year 1315, a quiet observer of the great rain, and a survivor of the coldest year. The woods are waiting for you, and you will return to them with a grateful heart and a steady hand. The next morning, the mist is still hanging over the village, but you wake with a sense of purpose. You check your basket, noting with satisfaction the small store of food you have gathered. You prepare a simple breakfast of dried apples and a bit of the birch bark pasta, the flavors humble but sustaining. You feel stronger today, more capable of facing the challenges of the world. You look out toward the forest, the dark line of trees a familiar and welcoming sight. You know that you will return there today, and the day after, and for as long as it takes for the sun to return. You are a forager, and the woods are your home. As you step out the door, the cool, damp air hits your face, but you don't flinch. You have learned to live with the moisture, to accept it as a part of your world. You move toward the trees, your steps light and confident. You are part of the landscape now, a quiet, steady presence in a world of change. The forest is waiting, and you are ready to walk the forager's path once more. You find beauty in the gray bark and the green moss, a sense of peace in the silence of the trees. You are a survivor of 1315, and you are finding your way through the damp, one step at a time. The earth may be saturated, but your spirit is still reaching for the light. The transition from the endless, weeping rain to the sharp, biting cold of the winter of 1315 occurs with a suddenness that catches you off guard. One evening, the rhythmic dripping from the thatch simply stops, replaced by a profound and heavy silence. You step outside your door and feel the air catch in your throat, a crisp, dry chill that hasn't been felt in months. The mud, which has been your constant, shifting companion, has finally surrendered to the frost. It has frozen into jagged, iron, hard ridges that trip your tired feet. The world is no longer a sponge, it is a statue, frozen in a pose of desperate exhaustion. You look up and see the stars for the first time in what feels like a lifetime. They are brilliant, cold, and indifferent, blinking down through a sky that is finally clear, but carries a new kind of threat. The wet year has become the cold year, and the toll on your body and your village is starting to weigh as heavy as the frozen earth itself. You return to your hearth, realizing that the luxury of the rain has been replaced by the necessity of the heat. You pull your bench closer to the embers, feeling the ache in your joints. This is the physical reality of the heavy toll. Your muscles, once lean and strong from years of healthy harvests, now feel stringy and thin. Every movement requires a conscious effort of will. You find yourself moving with a slow, deliberate grace, not out of a sense of peace, but because you simply don't have the energy for anything else. You could call it a very forced, very low-calorie version of a slow motion retreat, though there is nowhere left to run. Your body is rationing its heat, focusing on the core and leaving your hands and feet to fend for themselves in the creeping frost. If you think your office chair is bad for your back, try sitting on a frozen wooden stool while your internal thermostat tries to run on a handful of acorns and half a bowl of watery soup. The village has become a place of quiet, closed doors. In the summer, the air would be filled with the sound of children playing and the gossip of neighbors. Now, the only sound is the occasional, hollow cough echoing through the thin walls of the cottages. Sickness has arrived, a silent guest that moves from house to house. It isn't a dramatic plague with boils and fever. It is a slow, wasting fatigue that turns people into shadows. You visit a neighbor to trade some of your dried birch bark for a bit of tallow, and you are struck by how the room smells of sickness and unwashed wool. The heavy toll is visible in the way people hold themselves, their shoulders slumped and their eyes fixed on the floor. You realize that the lack of nutrition has stripped away the natural armor of the community. Everyone is vulnerable now, and the cold is looking for any crack in the defenses. This leads to a quirky and somewhat terrifying tidbit of history, the rise of ergotism, often called St. Anthony's fire, because the grain was so damp throughout the summer and autumn, a fungus called ergot grew on the rye. When people were desperate enough to grind this tainted grain into flour, they began to suffer from strange hallucinations and a burning sensation in their limbs. Historians still argue whether the dancing manias or the reports of people feeling like their skin was on fire during this period were caused primarily by this fungus or by a collective psychological breakdown brought on by the famine. You look at your own small store of grain, checking each kernel with a paranoid intensity. You would rather be hungry then find yourself dancing uncontrollably in the village square while your hands feel like they are being dipped in boiling oil. It is a grim choice to make, a reminder that in 1315, even your food can become your enemy. The mainstream historical fact of this winter is the staggering increase in mortality rates. In some regions of northern Europe, it is estimated that 1 out of every 10 people did not survive to see the spring of 1316. You see it in the way the local cemetery is being extended into the frozen field nearby. The work of digging a grave in the frozen ground is a Herculean task, requiring hours of hacking at the earth with iron picks. You watch a group of men performing this duty, their breath coming in thick, white plumes that vanish into the cold air. They move with a rhythmic, mechanical motion, their faces expressionless. Death has become a routine, a chore that must be completed before the sun goes down. The heavy toll is no longer a metaphor. It is a literal weight that the village must carry, one body at a time. You find yourself spending more time in a state of sleepy hunger, a strange twilight zone where you aren't quite awake, but aren't fully asleep. Your mind drifts through memories of better times, playing back scenes of golden wheat and warm bread like a favorite song. You find a bit of humor in your own predicament, thinking about how you once complained about the taste of a slightly burnt crust, or a stew that was too salty. Now, you would give a week's labor for a single bite of that bad food. You've become an expert in the art of the imaginary feast. You sit by your fire and mentally prepare a 5-course meal, detailing the texture of the meat and the sweetness of the wine. It doesn't fill your stomach, but it keeps your spirit from fading into the gray. You could call it the world's first and most desperate food blog, held entirely within the confines of your own skull. The shelter of your cottage feels smaller now that the cold has arrived. You've stuffed every crack in the walls with moss and mud, trying to keep the warmth from escaping. The air inside is thick and smoky, a haze that makes your eyes sting but keeps the frost at bay. You compare your situation to a modern drafty apartment, realizing that your 14th century home is essentially a pile of sticks and dried mud held together by hope and stubbornness. There is no insulation, no double-paned glass, and certainly no central heating. Your heating system is a hole in the ground filled with burning wood, and your smart thermostat is just you putting on another layer of damp wool. It is a primitive, exhausting way to live, but it makes you appreciate the simple reality of a flame. A single flickering fire is the only thing standing between you and the great, cold silence outside. As the winter deepens, you notice a change in the social fabric of the village. The neighborly spirit of the good years has been replaced by a quiet, protective isolation. People are keeping their stores hidden, and the shared meals that used to define the community have vanished. You pass a friend on the path and notice the way they glance at your basket, their eyes searching for any sign of food. It isn't malice. It's just the survival instinct, stripped of its polite veneer. You feel the same urge to guard your small treasures. The heavy toll is not just physical or economic, it is moral. It is the weight of having to choose between your own survival and the needs of someone you have known your whole life. You find yourself retreating into your own mind, finding comfort in the silence and the solitude. You think about the scholarly debate surrounding the Malthusian trap, Some historians believe that Europe in 1315 was overpopulated and that the famine was nature's way of correcting the balance. They argue that the soil was exhausted and the resources were stretched too thin. But as you sit in your cold cottage, that theory feels cold and heartless. You aren't a statistic or a correction. You are a human being who is trying to stay warm. You see the faces of the people in the village, and you know that they aren't part of an overpopulated mass. They are individuals with names and families and stories. The heavy toll is a tragedy of a million small moments, not a grand economic calculation. You find a sense of quiet rebellion in your own survival. By continuing to breathe, by continuing to stoke your fire, you are proving the theorists wrong. You are more than a number. The nights are the hardest. The cold creeps in through the floor, and under the door, a persistent, invisible hand that pulls the warmth from your body. You sleep with your dog curled up against you, the animal's steady heartbeat a comfort in the dark. You listen to the sounds of the night, the cracking of the frozen trees in the forest, the howling of the wind, and the occasional, distant thud of snow falling from the roof. It is a lonely, primeval landscape. You find yourself thinking about the generations of people who have survived winters like this before. They didn't have technology or medicine. They just had the same fire and the same stubborn will to live. You feel a connection to them, a thread of resilience that stretches back through the centuries. You are part of a long line of survivors, and you will not be the one to break the chain. One morning, you wake to find a thick layer of frost on the inside of your door. The world outside is a white wasteland, the fields covered in a blanket of snow that hides the scars of the muddy autumn. It looks beautiful, in a sterile and unforgiving way. You step out to clear a path, the snow crunching under your boots with a sharp, crisp sound. You see a bird, a small robin, frozen mid-perch on a branch. It looks like a delicate carving of wood and feathers. You feel a sudden, sharp pang of sorrow for the small creature. It did everything right, but the heavy toll was simply too much. You realize that the margin for error has become non-existent. One cold night, one missed meal, and the thread can snap. You move more carefully after that, aware of the fragility of your own existence. The physical toll on your hands is particularly evident. Your skin is cracked and red from the cold, and your nails are broken from hacking at the frozen wood. You rub a bit of animal fat into the sores, the grease smelling of the farm and the earth. It is a small comfort, a way to care for the body that is working so hard to keep you alive. You find that you have developed a new appreciation for the sensation of touch. The rough bark of a log, the smooth stone of the hearth, the soft wool of your cloak. These textures are your connection to the physical world. In a time when your stomach is empty and your mind is clouded, the reality of the things you can touch is a grounding force. You are still here. You are still solid. You spend an afternoon helping an elderly neighbor repair a leak in his roof. The man is too weak to climb the ladder, so you do the work for him, your hands trembling with the effort. You find a strange sense of satisfaction in the task. By helping someone else, you are reclaiming a bit of your own humanity. You are proving that the heavy toll hasn't completely crushed the spirit of the village. When you finish, the man gives you a single, dried pear, a treasure beyond price. You take it with a nod of thanks, the small, shriveled fruit representing a bond that the famine cannot break. You save the pear for your evening meal, savoring the concentrated sweetness as if it were a royal banquet. It is a reminder that even in the darkest winter, there is still sweetness to be found if you are patient. The heavy toll section of your life is a period of contraction. Everything is shrinking. Your world, your body, your expectations. You are learning to live on the very edge of what is possible. You find that you can go longer without food than you thought, and that you can find warmth in the smallest of sparks. You are discovering the core of who you are, stripped of the distractions and comforts of the good years. It is a hard lesson, but it is one that gives you a new kind of strength. You are no longer afraid of the cold. You have looked it in the eye and found a way to stand your ground. You are a survivor of 1315, and the heavy toll has only made your resolve more firm. As the sun sets over the frozen fields, you return to your cottage and prepare for another night. You bank the fire, check the door, and wrap yourself in your cloak. You listen to the silence of the winter, a silence that is no longer threatening but familiar. You feel a sense of peace settling over you, a quiet confidence that you will make it through to the morning. The heavy toll is still there, but you have learned to carry it. You have found the rhythm of the cold, and you are moving with it, one breath at a time. You fall into a deep, restful sleep, the image of the white robin and the dried pear drifting through your mind like a promise of spring. You dream of the sun returning, not as a distant, pale disk, but as a roaring, golden fire that melts the snow and turns the frozen mud back into fertile earth. You see the green shoots of the wheat pushing through the soil, strong and vibrant. You hear the laughter of the children and the sound of the village market in full swing. It is a dream of restoration, of a world that has been healed and made whole. You wake for a moment, feeling the cold air on your face, but you don't feel afraid. You know that the dream is a reflection of the future, a future that you are helping to build with every day you survive. You close your eyes and drift back into the shadows, the warmth of your own heart, keeping you safe in the heart of the winter. The heavy toll of 1315 is a chapter of sorrow, but it is also a chapter of incredible endurance. You are a part of that story, a quiet witness to the strength of the human spirit. As you sleep, the world outside continues its cold, silent march toward the spring. The frost will eventually melt, the snow will vanish, and the earth will wake up once more. And when it does, you will be there to greet it, a survivor of the coldest year, ready to start the cycle again. You are stronger than the winter, and your spirit is as unyielding as the frozen ground. Sleep now, and let the heavy toll fade into the quiet of the night. You have earned your rest, and the morning is only a heartbeat away. The first sign that the world is beginning to stir is not a sudden burst of sunlight or the bloom of a flower. It is a subtle, almost imperceptible change in the sound of the world. You wake in the early morning and notice that the air no longer has that brittle, glass-like quality that makes every movement feel like a violation of the silence. Instead, there is a soft, rhythmic dripping coming from the eaves, a sound you haven't heard in months without feeling a sense of dread. But this time, it is different. The drips are faster, more energetic, and the air carries a faint, earthy scent of melting ice and sleeping moss. You step out onto your doorstep, and for the first time in a year, the wind doesn't bite at your skin. It brushes past you with a gentle, cool touch, like a friend returning from a long journey. The frozen ridges of the path are softening, turning back into the familiar, humble mud that once seemed like an enemy, but now feels like a promise. The recovery is slow, and the wounds of the previous year are deep. But the earth is finally, tentatively, beginning to heal. You walk out toward the fields, your boots sinking into the slush with a satisfying, heavy sound. The landscape is still a mess of gray and brown, but there is a new energy in the light. The sun is a pale, watery disk, but it is actually casting shadows again, long and thin against the melting snow. You see the first patches of bare earth appearing on the hillsides, looking like dark islands in a sea of white. This is the mainstream historical fact of 1350. While the famine would technically continue for another year or two in some regions, the extreme weather patterns that had dominated 1315 finally began to stabilize. The Great Rain had spent its fury, and the Great Cold was retreating toward the poles. You stand in the middle of your field and realize that the ground is no longer a trap. It is a canvas again. You can see the flattened, gray remains of last year's failed crop, a somber reminder of what you've lost. But beneath that layer of decay, the soil is waking up. The village is beginning to emerge from its winter hibernation. You see smoke rising from more chimneys, and the doors that were tightly shut for months are now standing open to catch the fresh air. People are moving outside, their movement still slow and cautious, but there is a new expression on their faces. It isn't quite joy. It's a quiet, focused determination. You pass the village well and see a group of women washing clothes, their hands red from the cold water, but their voices murmuring in a way that sounds almost like the gossip of the old days. You could call it a very slow, motion-grand reopening of the world, though there are no ribbons to cut, and the catering is still mostly thin soup and hope. You find yourself smiling at a small child who is poking at a puddle with a stick. It is a simple, everyday sight that feels like a miracle. After the silence of the heavy toll, historians still argue whether the recovery was hampered more by the lack of seeds to plant or by the loss of draft animals during the winter. You see the truth of this debate as you look toward the village common. There are very few oxen left, and those that survived are thin and weak, their coats dull and their ribs showing. Without the strength of these animals to pull the heavy plows, the work of preparing the fields will have to be done by hand. It is a daunting prospect, but the alternative is another year of hunger. You see a neighbor already out in his plot, using a spade to turn over the heavy soil. He stops to wipe his brow, and you give him a silent nod of respect. This is the quirky tidbit of the recovery: the human plow. Groups of men and women would harness themselves to the heavy wooden frames, pulling together in a rhythmic, agonizing effort to break the earth. It was a display of communal strength that defined the post-famine years, a reminder that survival is a team sport. You return to your own garden patch and begin the work of clearing the debris. You move slowly, your body still feeling the effects of the long, lean winter, but the physical labor feels good. It gives you a sense of purpose, a way to channel your nervous energy into something productive. You find a few hardy leeks that have survived under the snow. Their green tops are vibrant, shocking contrast to the gray world. You harvest them with a sense of reverence, imagining the flavor they will add to your evening meal. You also find the first few shoots of nettles pushing through the mud near the fence. In 1315, they were a desperate famine food. In 1316, they are the first taste of spring. You find a bit of humor in how your standards have shifted. A year ago, a garden full of weeds was a sign of neglect. Today, it is a sign of life. The village market is slowly returning to life as well. It isn't the bustling hub it once was, but there is more to see than there was in the dark months. A merchant has arrived with a small supply of seed grain, his cart guarded by two men with sturdy staves. The prices are still high, but people are willing to trade whatever they have left. A silver buckle, a good wool cloak, or even their future labor, for a handful of life. You watch a transaction take place, the grain passing from the merchant's hand to the farmer's like a sacred relic. There is a mainstream historical fact that the seed corn was so precious that some governments passed laws forbidding anyone from eating it, even in the face of starvation. To eat your seed is to consume your future, and the people of 1316 are fiercely protective of what is to come. You manage to trade a few of your dried forest mushrooms for a small pouch of rye seeds, holding them close to your chest as you walk home. As the weeks pass, the recovery takes on a rhythmic, steady pace. The rain still falls, but it is the gentle, life-giving rain of spring, not the destructive deluge of the previous year. You spend your days in the fields, your hands calloused and your back aching, but you are driven by a quiet hope. You watch the sun climb higher in the sky each day, its warmth soaking into the ground and pulling the moisture out of the mud. You find yourself performing a historical comparison, thinking about how different this spring feels compared to the one before. In 1315, the rain felt like an intruder, a force that was trying to erase you. In 1316, the weather feels like a partner, a difficult and unpredictable one, but a partner nonetheless. You've learned to read the clouds with a new intensity, looking for the signs of change before they arrive. There is a scholarly debate about whether the Great Famine led to a permanent shift in the European diet. Some argue that the reliance on hardy grains like rye and barley increased, because they were more resistant to the damp than the more delicate wheat. You see this reflected in your own planting choices. You are putting more of your effort into the crops that you know can handle a bit of moisture. You are diversifying, spreading your risk across different parts of the land. It's a primitive form of risk management, born out of the hard lessons of 1315. You could call it the world's most practical and least fun agricultural startup. You aren't looking for a disruptive new product. You're just looking for a loaf of bread that doesn't rot before it hits the table. The evening light is longer now, a soft, golden glow that lingers over the village. You sit on your bench and watch the first few birds return from the south. Their songs are a welcome addition to the soundtrack of the recovery, a bright and cheerful melody that cuts through the somber memory of the winter. You think about the people you lost, the elderly neighbor, the frail child, the friend who succumbed to the wasting fatigue. They are not forgotten, but their absence is becoming a part of the landscape, like the scars on the trees after a great storm. The recovery is not just about the fields, it is about the heart. It is the slow process of learning to trust the world again, of believing that the sun will return and the earth will provide. You find comfort in the simple, repetitive tasks of the farm: mending a fence, sharpening a tool, tending to the fire. These are the anchors of your life. They provide a sense of continuity in a world that has been turned upside down. You find yourself becoming a master of the long view. You aren't just thinking about tomorrow's meal. You're thinking about the harvest 6 months away and the winter after that. The year 1315 has taught you that life is fragile, but it has also taught you that you are resilient. You have a new kind of strength, a hard-won wisdom that only comes from staring down the end of the world and refusing to blink. You are a survivor, and that identity is now woven into the very fabric of your being. As the moon rises over the valley, you see the silver light reflecting off the small, clear streams that run through the fields. The world is beautiful again, in a quiet and understated way. It isn't the lush, easy beauty of the warm years, but a more profound, resilient beauty that has been tested by fire and ice. You feel a deep sense of connection to the land, a realization that you and the earth are part of the same story. You are both recovering, both healing, and both moving forward toward a new and uncertain future. You take a deep breath of the cool, night air, feeling the moisture and the scent of growing things. You are ready for whatever comes next, because you know that you have the strength to handle it. The transition to sleep is easier, now that the hunger has started to lift. You have a bit more food in your belly, a bit more warmth in your hearth, and a lot more hope in your heart. You lie down in your bed straw, which finally feels dry and sweet, smelling again. You listen to the sounds of the night, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of the wind in the thatch, and the steady, calm rhythm of your own breathing. You are at peace with the world, even if it is a fragile peace. You have survived the coldest year, the wettest year, and the hardest year of your life. You have witnessed history, and you have come out the other side with your spirit intact. You dream of the harvest, but it is a dream of reality, not fantasy. You see the golden grain, but you also see the sweat on your brow and the ache in your muscles. You see the village market, but you also see the guarded expressions and the high prices. You see a world that is scarred but standing, a world that has learned the value of a sunny day and a dry crust of bread. It is a beautiful dream, because it is a dream of a world that you are helping to create. You wake for a moment in the middle of the night, feeling the warmth of your dog curled at your feet, and you smile. You are alive, you are safe, and the spring is here. As the first light of dawn begins to touch the sky, you are ready to face the day. You will head out into the fields. You will work the soil, and you will plant the seeds of the future. You are a survivor of 1315, a witness to the Great Famine, and a part of the long, unbroken story of human endurance. The recovery is slow and the path is hard, but you are moving forward, one quiet, steady step at a time. The world is healing, and you are healing with it. The coldest year is behind you, and the sun is finally starting to shine. The world is moving slower now, and the shadows in your room are growing long and soft, reaching out like gentle hands to pull you into the quiet. You can feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders, leaving you light and unburdened as the last echoes of history fade into the evening air. the story of the mud, the rain, and the frozen earth is drifting away, replaced by the steady, rhythmic pulse of the present moment. Your breathing is slow and deep, a calm tide that carries you further and further away from the noise of the world and into the soft, velvet embrace of sleep. Think of the fields as they are now, quiet and resting under the silver light of a gentle moon. The earth is warm and still, the seeds tucked safely into their dark beds, dreaming of the sun. There is no rush here, no deadlines, no struggle. There is only the slow, natural turning of the seasons and the profound peace of a world at rest. You are a part of that stillness, a quiet presence in a world that has found its balance once again. The air around you is cool and sweet, carrying the faint scent of lavender and old wood, a soothing balm for your tired senses. Let your thoughts drift like the mist over a summer meadow, formless and light, moving with the softest breeze. You are safe, you are warm, and there is nothing left for you to do but let go. The journey through 1315 is over, and the recovery has begun. You have found your way through the damp and the cold, and now you have found your way to the shore of dreams. Close your eyes and let the world dissolve into a soft, glowing hum. Everything is as it should be. The earth is holding you, the night is protecting you, and the morning is a long, peaceful sleep away. Sweet dreams and rest well.